He should be on his way, but obviously he's not here, so we can start with the other things.
Can we start out with the shortest one of all?
Do you wanna go into workshop right away?
Yeah, we can do all
Yeah,
the
we
rest
can
of
go-
this stuff
okay.
before Randy gets here.
Workshop work.
Alright, number one on the workshop, a public hearing is scheduled for October 9th at 5:30 for the floodplain management ordinance 150. The first reading is scheduled for tonight, but we have chosen that we will provide it to the public on their website, to go on there and actually read. I think I don't even know how many pages, 15, 20 pages. A lot. So, we are providing it to the public on our website. Let's see. I guess
Are
I
you
can-
gonna read it?
I'm not
Provide
reading
a voice,
the 30 pages, no.
voiceover?
No.
Narrated by.
Siri.
You guys wanna go to sleep tonight? Just listen to me talk or read you a story. No, I'm sorry.
I think she should narrate it, but we should have some background music to go with it.
The DNR is required to review and approve all new and amended floodplain ordinances prior to their adoption to verify that minimum state and federal standards are met. They have approved this, so now we are going on to the next step. We will skip over number 2, which is the building code, ordinance examples. Randy is on his way, and he has, and they're on the copier. I'll go and grab them. We have fee schedules that he put together so you can see the different ways. I also wrote down since 2018, the number of, does she need a fob?
Oh.
Got it, thank you. Since 2018 to 2023, how many zoning permits we have issued, and then how many new and commercial homes were built every single year, just to give kind of an idea of where we all sit. The next thing on is the preliminary tax levy. As I stated at the last meeting, I stated a proposed 10% increase for 2024. This increase is largely due to wages and insurance increases on health, property, and liability, inflationary, and rate increases. So as you see, I kind of mapped it out in regards to what the previous levies were and what the preliminary levy is from 2020 to current. And as we were just talking about the LGA, just to go through the amounts that have been received in the past and see how that it did go up the 9% that he was actually explaining this year. So it went from $995,929 to $1,093,749. So. And just to give you kind of an idea, the local government aid is one of our sources of revenue besides property tax and other revenues that we generate, but it is 45% of our total revenue. So that is a huge portion of our budget, and so that's why it's so important. Questions, thoughts on the proposed property tax levy?
So last year our proposed increase was 10.4%.
Well, on the general side, so, and then our debt service, so both of them added together gave us a 10%, and that's the same thing. So our general is 10.5 technically, and then our debt service is 6.25, and when you do the formula, it's 10 across.
And was that, did we settle on 10 as the final?
Yes,
Or did we reduce
you
it?
settled at 10 last year, yes, that was correct.
Do we have the total, tax base number?
No, and I
Yeah.
was struggling, to get all of those numbers, but those reports have not come out. So our truth and taxation meeting is scheduled for, the first meeting in December, and those reports will come out before that.
Okay.
So, some of the community members have come in, and I've actually have a spreadsheet that actually, I put everything in and it can actually break it all down and tell them what their share would be, only of the city tax. It does not say anything about the school or the county. So it's just the city tax line, based on what our proposal is, based on, all of the different things that go into it.
Well, and I think one of the points that we tried to make last year that should be made again this year is just because this number goes up doesn't necessarily mean, you know, your taxes are going up, your city portion of taxes is going to go up 10%. There's more in that equation, so any growth that the city has had also eats into that number. And that's definitely one of those things where we'll have more of a, you know, in-depth approach to that during the truth and taxation meeting, but there is a lot of parts to the equation beyond what this number is.
Yes.
So the public should be aware that, and, you know, anybody that's looked at their tax statement realizes that it's not, you know, just one number. There's multiple components that are, you know, added in their formula to calculate what you owe. And this is just one portion of it.
And just like you were saying, there's a lot of components. That percent, or that 10% increase last year actually dropped our tax rate down. I mean, just because we say that we have a 10% increase,
Right,
our tax rate was actually less last year. And
because
so-
of the growth of the tax base,
Yep,
you know, and the hard thing that's the one thing that's kind of hard to quantify without really getting into the weeds is how much of it's growth, how much of it's change in estimated tax value, how much of it's new properties coming onto the tax roll, how much is, you know, of the, you know, formula is properties that were estimated higher the year before that dropped. I mean, that's a pretty complicated equation. So it's definitely one of those things where you're gonna wanna have.
right here is proof that we're adding more to our base.
Right.
I mean, in 2018, we had 2 new commercial buildings. 2019, we had one new home. In 2020, we added 5 new homes. 2021, we had 2 commercial and 1 new home. 2022, we added 3 more new homes. 2023, 2 new homes and 2 commercial buildings. We're adding more to the whole value.
Right. But it's hard to quantify because of the fact that it's.
Well, it's a bad
A
economy
complicated
in
formula.
regards to the market values
Yep.
too.
Yeah.
So at this point, as the reports start coming out, I will put the truth and taxation presentation together. But, you know, it goes with those reports, it goes with your estimated, tax statement that comes out, on your market value for next year. You know, those all are important that haven't been, come out yet.
So we're still trying to figure out what the increase is per household or whatever. Yeah.
And right now, the preliminary tax, we set the preliminary tax levy at what we predict that we need. This is the highest you can go. If we come back in December and we find out that we don't need 10%, we can go down to 5%.
Yes.
But we cannot go over 10%.
Yes.
So, but there's a lot of factors that go into it, and they will start coming together by December.
Okay.
Do we have numbers yet for what insurance and,
Yes.
everything's gonna be for next year?
We have numbers for insurance, but we have to wait for other numbers to come out on October 1st. So that's the other thing. I had to put in the highest amount, okay? So we are looking at different, types of insurance, not on the property and the liability, because we go through the lead on that, so that is what it is. And so, and just like I did state before, you know, the safety, the police section of the liability has increased a large amount. But for our health insurance and everything like that, I only have one amount at this time, and I have to wait until October 1st to get the other one. So to make it safe, I had to put in this large amount to make sure that we could cover it. Does that make sense? I mean,
That was my question, you know, what numbers do we have? I know October 1st is kind of their cutoff when they have to have their numbers out to you.
and so, working with Mark Scarpel in regards to getting more numbers, different providers, different ways of looking at this, different options, to see which way we can go.
Okay.
And we're not the only town that's involved in this right now, and so
Sure.
I had to take that large increase in the health, and just to make sure we were safe on the 10%, to move forward.
Are you feeling comfortable with 10 instead of possibly 10 and a half?
No, I mean, it would be 10. I mean, you're 10.5 for your general, is that what you're looking at?
No, I mean, just in overall.
In
Not
overall,
not
10
just
is-
because it's on.
10 is very comfortable at this point.
Because I know we can't go up, we can go down.
And
We
that's,
can't go up.
I strongly wanna express that, is you can't go up any further, so, but we can go down.
Yes. That I do.
And just so that you are aware that I have done, I mean, obviously a lot of towns are doing it this week because you have to do it before the 30th of September to do your preliminary levy. So the towns that have come out so far, New Ulm I think was at 6 point something, there was another town at 10%. I haven't seen anything in between other than 6 and 10 in that range.
Everybody's got the same thing that they're up against.
Yep, and it comes back to a lot of the insurance issues. Any other questions on the budget, thoughts?
I'm sure there'll be more later once we get all the numbers in.
Yep, and we know we're wrapping up all of our seasons.
Yeah.
We're wrapping up our season on, you know, the park, the golf and all of that, so, we'll start having commission meetings and then you'll get to see the final numbers and start going through that stuff and preparing for what we need to do for next year. And so it'll start to fit together. Okay, just one more thing before we jump into, Randy's over there, is the joint powers agreement, that is on the agenda for tonight, with Watonwan County. This is for the Center Avenue project. We have to go into a joint powers agreement with Watonwan County. They are actually the fiscal host of the bonding money that comes in. Also Daryl, the Watonwan County engineer, he oversees a lot of the stuff that we do. Jim, help me explain this, am I explaining it right? So we're going into a joint powers agreement that basically states that, you know, Bolton Mink is involved, the city and Bolton Mink work on the engineering and the construction. We go through all the pay requests, we bring them to the council, we approve all the pay requests, but then it goes to Daryl over at Watonwan County to go through it and then request funding to be reimbursed back to the city, so then we pay the contractor.
Chris,
what Daryl, he referred to it as a dance, because he'd never been in one of the, like this before. Normally, when you get funding like that, you get it in one lump sum. We don't get it until you submit the bill, and he has to submit it, then he gets paid, and he gets it back to you. It's because something about state law, any town under 5,000, you have to go through the county, right?
Yep.
And the county doesn't charge anything for this, it's just.
Tony's
Yeah.
just a
Services
pass.
paid for.
But
Well-
it's, like I said, it's just gonna be a dance for 2 years.
Yeah, it's a pass-through, but there's a lot of people involved,
So does Bolton Mink write that into the spec, so the contractors that are involved know that it's gonna be I would assume it's not gonna happen in a day submittal-wise where they're gonna get paid. It's gonna probably be a 3-week process, so they'll probably be a month behind.
No, and we have to explain that to them, that it's not, this is a different kind of project, but when you submit your pay request then comes to the council for approval. Once the council approves it, and then it goes to Daryl then cuts it, or gives it to Kelly or financial. They request it from the state, and then it comes back through the county, and the county reimburses us. Yes, it is quite a,
That's what I mean, and so I'd assume that's gonna end up being in the spec somewhere. Let
Well,
them know that
we'll
it's
have
gonna
to
be a-
explain everything to them.
Might take a 60-day payment process or whatever. The other,
Just Glenn's favorite bureaucracy type of thing.
the other question I guess I'd have is, so is there gonna be a county inspector as well as a hired inspector for the job then, or not?
There won't be a county inspector, but Daryl does go through everything with us. Daryl actually sits in on all of our meetings. The plans are, because there's only just that small portion of the county road involved.
Yep.
But we are building it to Daryl's, the specification that Daryl's requesting, so.
So I would assume that Daryl's signature as well as Adams will be on the plan set?
No, I believe it's only Adams, and, we had to go through, a Bolton, or, an audit through the state, in regards to allowing Adam or Bolton Mink to be the engineer. They must have did it on another project, otherwise it would have been the county engineer that would have signed off on the plans.
Compliment Daryl all you can, to try and get him to work another 3 years before he retires. Because what's gonna mess this up, he retires, we can't find an engineer, or we get a new one that's not familiar with it. Hopefully Daryl would work with the person for a few months if someone does come in new.
Yeah.
But he's got a lot of knowledge.
In talking with Adam, he was talking about a 2024 construction start.
If the bidding goes out on time, and if the contractor is available to put the shovel in the ground, all depends on what that contractor wants to do, could do a fall, or, I'm not stating anything at this time, but to be realistic, I see a 2025 shovel in the ground. What's that look for?
Just wondering.
I mean, considering you're in that field, how fast do you think you can get it done?
Well, it's gonna be a 2-year project, no matter what, in my eyes. But now that they've eliminated some or changed some of it around, you know, theoretically it could be done in a year, but it would be a mess.
A
in
mess.
year. Yeah, I mean, it could, I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it would be a lot of construction workers working in multiple areas at the same time.
Which could completely shut down any transportation in that whole main corridor.
Right. So, my guess is they're probably gonna do I asked Adam about it a little bit, asking if there was gonna be a staging or a phasing of it, so that they would, and he said he's probably gonna leave it up to the contractors as much as possible. But it really depends on too, you know, what the final bid project comes out at, to who they're gonna recruit for contractors, because of the fact that it's a large enough job where big firms might come in and try to do it instead of your local, you know, smaller firms that might be normally doing 4 to 5 block sector, projects, or this is gonna be, you know,
appealing to some of the bigger ones.
appealing to somebody that might wanna come in and, you know, just do it, but that being said, those people usually come in and they wanna do it quickly, which is not always as convenient for the community, but
I know.
nothing says it can't be done in a year either. And I don't know, what's better, rip the Band-Aid off all at once or slowly peel it off? Let you breathe through it, I don't know. It'll be, I mean, it's gonna be definitely probably as big a project as this community's seen since Main Street was redone.
Mhm. I don't know, either way you rip off that Band-Aid on.
Hey, Chris, I do have a question.
Sure.
When you say this is a pass-through, it's a true pass-through, right? There's not gonna be any tax from the county?
No.
Nope.
Okay.
No fees, no tax.
I tried to ask Earl if we could get something, he said, no, we can't.
One or two
Well,
said
it's not
handling
necessarily
fee.
very-
We get a pickup out of the deal or something, we can't.
It may not even be something nefarious, it could be something just like the wage for whoever's the engineer or something, I don't know, I'm just wondering.
Nothing.
That's off the table,
He said it's part of being part of the county.
being the engineer?
It has to be done.
Okay.
Any other questions about that? No? Alright, then we'll go on to, the building code adoption, ordinance examples that I have in the packet. And did you grab all those off the copier? And Randy is here to go over, some of the fee structure, Thank you. Okay, Randy, before you came in, I wanted to go through this with you.
Sure.
I went through since 2018 to 2023, and these are the permits, just zoning permits. So this doesn't include like all of the permits that would be involved if we would go to this.
Yep.
So in 2028, we had 77 permits, so 77 zoning permits.
Do you have a breakdown on?
And then we had 2 new commercial. I'm only gonna give you the new stuff, is that right? Is that?
Well, it's helpful either way.
I can give you everything later on, but just to give you kind of an idea, like the 77 include like new shingles or addition onto the house or something like that. In 2019, we had 69 zoning permits. Our new things in the city was the new city shaft rebuild, and then we had 1 new home. In 2020, we had 51 zoning permits, and we had 5 new homes. In 2021, we had 70 zoning permits, 2 new commercial buildings, and 1 new home. 2022, we had 61 zoning permits and 3 new homes. 2023, we have 37 zoning permits, 2 new homes, and 2 commercial buildings. So,
Perfect, appreciate that.
how do we start tonight?
Well, I don't have a copy of the potential ordinance that, yeah, unless it's just this.
So the
Copy
two,
of
the 2 ordinances came out of this book,
Okay,
so that's basically what I provided them.
sure,
It's just a generic, one that came out of the book.
yep. So yeah, to start off with, that's a pretty generic version of it, but that's what most of them look like at an ordinance level for each city, and then usually there's a public commenting period that would happen along with that. That's relatively straightforward with respect to, you know, adoption, whether you guys decide to or don't. after discussion on the last council meeting that we had, and then speaking with Chris, it sounded like getting a little bit more clarity for the council on some of the cost dynamics would be a beneficial exercise. And that was kind of what I was hoping to do this evening. So in the various appendixes that I provided to Chris, and you'll see to start off with, there's actually 2 Appendix A's. Each of those appendixes, you'll see on the top, one of them says 1994 UBC, and the other says 1997 UBC. So essentially, these are 2 appendix or copies of potential building permit fee schedules. This is what a traditional schedule would look like. And it starts off on the very first page on either one, depending upon which one you're looking at. Total cost of valuation, which would be the total construction cost. The fee associated with that broken down by that valuation parameter. And then as you work down the page, you have your surcharge fee summary, because unlike the county, of course, the state's still gotta get a small fee. And then in addition to that, your plan review summary, and then the breakdown for that total permit fee. So total permit fees, which I know we discussed a little bit last time, are based on the actual building permit at the city level, which is established by you as the council. The state surcharge, which is a standardized rate across the state, either $1 for maintenance-based type permits, or it's based on a .0005 amount per the evaluation for construction cost. And then if there's a plan review fee, which gets you to your total permit fee cost. So that's kind of how the breakdown works for them. As you work from Appendix A in either the valuation tables into Appendix B, it then breaks down further what you're looking at specifically to flat rate permits, including maintenance type permits. And those are permits, again, that traditionally fall under things that are residential maintenance oriented: roofing, siding, windows, doors, mechanical changeouts, and those are generally all flat fee permits. Most of the municipalities that we work with, as well as the table that you'll see in either example, they're usually somewhere around the $50 to $65 range. There's some that are a little higher than that, get into the $80, $90 range, but that's about the most common range. $59 is what we established as probably the best base set point for the city of Medelia, and that's approximately $4, $5 less than what the city of Lake Crystal is, for example. As you work further down, the building permit fee schedule does generally establish another area for zoning permits, so you can include all of that in the same document if you'd like to, or you can set that up separately. And then from there, it gets into, again, itemizing out further plumbing permits and maintenance permits, how each of those work. And then it goes beyond that into related building permits that aren't quite as common. And those would be things like moving buildings in and out. If you get into manufactured home settings, and then in addition to that, demolition permits and plumbing connection fees for manufactured homes. And then the reimbursement schedule, which is an important part. A lot of cities unfortunately fail to have in there. But refund of fees is a requirement by the building code, meaning that, say someone wants to build a house, something financially happens, a family situation happens, the building permit's never rendered, there's an expectation that they get back a portion of it based upon the amount of work that's been rendered up to that point. So refund of fees is also an important facet of a building permit fee schedule. But the total document essentially outlines the whole entire fee schedule associated with permitting per the building code, and depending upon what you're looking at, whether it's a residential permit or a commercial-based permit.
All right, so, can I give you a scenario, and then you kinda,
Yep, and I do have a couple on the next document I can cover.
oh, you do, go for it.
Okay, so if you move to Appendix C, that's your data and projections sample. In here, this is just the projections that we internally modeled based on some of the information that Chris had provided to us. In addition to that, based on similar sized communities and your guys' current economic development and what you guys have for business and population density here. It's a roughly about half or a little less than what the city of Lake Crystal would have. But needless to say, based on what you had just mentioned too, Chris, I don't think we're really that far off. We might actually be underestimating a little bit based on the zoning permits. But the building permit statistics that we compiled was 85 permits total for residential, and that's of all kinds. Same would apply for commercial-based permits. We did not include any new commercial building permits in this. The 4 new construction permits is based off specifically residential. And we did that purposely because commercial-based activity in smaller communities isn't as consistent. The total number of building permits are that bring it to about 101, which is again just a little bit over the zoning permits Chris had just mentioned. And that's probably going to be the case. I would estimate we're probably in that 100 to 125, 130 permit range. And then you move down the page to building permit, excuse me, revenue projection. And this is based on the lower amount fee schedule, not the higher of the two. And you'll see the 85% or 85 residential based permits, 65% of them historically come from maintenance-based activities. That's usually what we find in residential settings. So that brings you to the grand total that you see to the right. And as you move down, the 11 commercial-based permits, the 2 new construction permits. We averaged at 2 a year is what we left it at, and that'd be again new construction residential settings, which brings you to the grand total of just over 23,000. That's what we expect the revenue projection to be for the city. Average cost modeling, which is what Chris was kind of just asking about. I ran some different numbers because I know that came up in the last meeting with respect to cost dynamics associated with permits, and again, this is based on the 2 lesser of the fee tables or schedules, I should say, rather, that I provided, but $100,000 addition would be just over $1,100 in total. And this includes plan review costs because I wanted to show what the higher amount would be, meaning that if it was an addition or an alteration that required us to physically look through the blueprint and identify things. And then the next one is a $350,000 new construction residential setting, also including plan review costs. So you'd see that, and that's at a 35% rate. That brings it to a grand total of just over $2,800. That's about what we're seeing on average, is that $350,000 to $400,000 range. And then the last document that I did compile in there for you too, because I know questions that came up a little bit about work that's exempt from a permit, is specifically the 1300 administrative rules, which kind of govern part of our activity and what we can and can't do as building officials. And specifically, it governs what is exempt from a permit. The language gets a little harder to read at times. That's our world. But needless to say, if you go down under subpart 4, where it says work exempt from a permit, each categorical area you'll see A and B and C, but A is building, so then it'll go through each of the categories under building, specifically that are exempt. And then as you go to the second page, you'll get into gas and mechanical and so forth, and that governs each of those areas within that categorical work area that is also exempt from a permit. That's all I have, of course, unless you have questions.
Council, do you have any questions?
Just from a execution standpoint, if your services are no longer available and we adopt this ordinance, what's our responsibility?
Yep, your responsibility would be at your population size. You could either revoke it again, or you could notify the state and hire someone else. And you could do that voluntarily. Yep. So if you were unpleased with whatever contractor you chose to do it, or employed it internally, you could do the same. You can continue to keep the building code and move on, is what I'm getting at.
Just knowing the amount of building officials that are, leaving the profession, or there's a lot of vacancies out there. I mean, I don't know right now how many cities you're covering, but I know there are, a number of openings statewide for building officials.
There is. Yep.
I think it might be hard to find and fill that position if a contracted building professional isn't kind of overseeing it.
Sure.
So I just kind of want to know what the exit strategy is if it becomes one of those issues where, one, we can't, find somebody to do it, or two, your company or somebody else's company isn't necessarily the service we're looking for down the road. What's it look like?
Yep. Yeah, so there is an exit strategy there. The state, of course, recognizes that people retire, people leave, get sick, injuries happen. Yep. So we expect there to be an exit strategy, and the law does provide
just have to make sure that we notify the state.
Right.
And some things weren't taken care of, which I think were just overlooked just because we didn't know. And so we just need to notify the state that we rescind the ordinance and go back
So
to.
we just do that at a city council meeting where we vote to rescind it, and we would notify the state that we are no longer under the building code,
Pretty
right?
much, right?
Yep, you have to notify the state within 14 days of a vacancy or the decision to move forward. Once you do that, quite honestly, I don't know what legal parameters.
So once
of time
we're in this, we're not like stuck in it, like,
One of the other questions I'd have is the, language here is for fences and even decks and stuff, to make sure they're within the, resident's property. Is that something that we're still gonna have to determine?
Yep, so some cities we do work with on zoning side. City of Lake Crystal would be an example of that. So it kind of depends how you want to structure the contract. I can't speak to that for all vendors out there, but yes, we
Sure.
do take care of that if that's a need for the community.
So do you
It's
just give
entirely
an
up to you.
extra quote in regards to those services?
Correct, yep. Yeah, we usually build into our contracts ancillary stuff, even if there's hypotheticals that occur in the future that are unforeseen, purely for that. Usually zoning discussions are usually had during the contract period.
Okay.
We'll usually build it in, and if the community decides not to use it, then that's perfectly acceptable, but we prefer to have it in there in case you do wanna execute it.
I get to get rid of my tape measure?
Better keep it.
So how does council want to proceed at this point then? Do you wanna go over the ordinances? Do you want some more time to think? You gotta give me some direction.
I mean, I guess if it's a boilerplate ordinance, I guess I don't know how everybody else feels. I know for a fact, the last, 4 or 5 years has been kind of challenging in the fact that, without having code enforcement there, I know we're, hiring on for new construction, or we have somebody else, kind of helping us through it without having the ordinance in place. Just to make sure that whatever,
Yeah, we're providing quality product within the city.
as much as possible, but still not having, doesn't really have the same backbone either.
We
Yeah.
don't acquire fees high enough to even pay for his services. Because our fee schedule is not set to have somebody.
Right. Well, the other thing is, I'm, on board with, I think, having a plan review process for new construction and making sure that, anything getting built is at least meeting safety requirements and ADA compliance for commercial use and that type of thing is definitely great. I think this is probably the best solution we can come up with. I definitely don't wanna staff a full-time person as a building official. But I think we need to see what the ordinance looks like, not maybe set as an example, but how it would be written for us exclusively.
I believe these numbers totally dictate that you should not have a full-time person on staff.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
You're the choice.
so what you're seeing, asking is if, Patrick, does this look like something that we would have adopted, or would you write something up specifically for our community then?
I would be looking to adopt something as close to the state,
Example?
the state's parameters as possible. I would not be trying to reinvent the wheel. More the input that you guys would provide in preparing that would be what the fee schedule looks like.
And that's
And what
something we have
those,
to
what
discuss,
those,
right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
That's something that we have to discuss yet to decide what we want for our fee
Correct.
schedule.
Yeah, you need to decide what the costs associated with that are, but you're probably gonna wanna put that in a context with the cost of doing business as far as having someone, contracted out to be the inspector, so.
And that would be something where the fee schedule itself wouldn't be spelled out in the ordinance because it would have to be approved annually, correct?
Yeah, so can we, put it where the fee schedule is actually on our fee schedule that we approve at the beginning of the year?
And then if rates for their, you know,
I don't see what we can't do it
services
that way.
change, we can update our fee schedule to match.
Then
Of
we're
course.
not, we do that by resolution, so then we're not amending the ordinance all the time.
Yeah, that might make more sense.
So that verbiage would have to change within the permits and the fees.
It would just say that it would be done yearly by the city council by a resolution.
Yeah,
That'd make that easy.
yep. Anything else you see on here?
So like, just, maybe it doesn't need the answer right now, but like under the plumbing permit, these new fixtures, is that something that we have to enforce?
Yeah, so when you deal with the building code, you can't pick and choose. I will tell you, much like electrical, people changing an outlet, a light fixture, that stuff's actually under the electrical code permits, it's just people tend to change plumbing fixtures without a permit often.
In a lot of cases, I don't
So,
think, you know, working in the inspector's office and where I am, I would say in a lot of cases, unless a plumber is actually hired, they wouldn't pull a permit for that. You wouldn't see a permit come through.
Yeah, only reason I ask, it's $75 minimum and it says, you know, examples include toilet, faucets, exterior hose bibs. Well, I want to replace my kitchen faucet and I pay $75 to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus
it's-
the
I would
price
say
of the
that
faucet, holy
is
cow.
one of the most common ones that don't. There's some gray areas there that routinely don't get permits pulled. It should still be in your fee schedule, however you decide you want to structure it from a fee standpoint, so that it's there in the event that somebody does, because even though maybe 6 out of 10 people don't, the 4 that do, you need to have the same fair fee schedule and make sure.
Do any of the cities that you work with now have construction minimum in place? So if the project's under $1,000 or $500,
Mhm.
the recommendation is just not to pull a permit?
No, there again, the fee will be minuscule.
No, I saw that.
But it doesn't change. I mean, to be honest, in a lot of those situations, and we had one the other day that got issued and it was $18 or $22, it doesn't even cover our costs.
Right.
But it still has to be done. I mean, that's part of the cost of doing business and the cost of enforcing the code. So no, there's not, and the state does not provide an exemption to the quantity of dollars it takes for the construction work. If it simply falls under any of the work that's not exempt, it still requires a permit or should have a permit pulled.
Okay.
And you guys do have an online, like, so that, for that 1 to 500, that could be something where somebody can take a picture of whatever they're doing.
Oh, you're saying from an enforcement standpoint?
Yeah.
Yep, depends what it is. Yep, so the way we always have it structured in ours is that stuff has to be approved by the building official, meaning virtual. For certain activities, we'll allow that and others we won't. Pictures are common to some types of roofing activity, so long as we know the roofing contractor, water heater change outs, connection points for different things, we'll allow that, but I'd say 90% of things virtual is not allowed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a small quantity of the total number of permits, because you just can't see everything you need to all the time in a phone camera or a laptop. Make things more difficult.
I guess my other question would be is enforcement wise, you know, if this is put into place, is it just all new construction from that date forward?
Yes, yeah, it'd be any new permitted activity from the date that you adopted it moving forward.
So any projects that are currently underway wouldn't necessarily be
Nope, and the
enforced?
building code exempts past stuff. I mean,
Okay.
you've probably heard the term grandfather.
Yep.
Most people have. That grandfather's not in the code book anywhere, but it's a term that gets used often for work that was permitted years prior. We would never go into an older house and say, oh, you gotta applies when you pull a permit.
You guys tell me what you want me to do.
I guess I would write up, ordinance for review.
Okay, so that's what we will do for next council
Proposed
meeting.
fee schedule, unless anybody's got a different thought.
No, I talked to all the construction people, one of them just doesn't like government, the other two says we need it, so. So,
Welcome to my world.
Okay, then we will get that ready for our next workshop.
okay.
Okay. Any more questions for Randy?
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn the workshop? I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
I
All opposed, same sign.